To visit my family and a few acquaintances on the West Coast, I was traveling across the United States by car. I reserved a cabin to spend the night in on the way there. It was only intended to be there for 10 or 12 hours. Simply put, eat dinner, take a shower, go to bed, and then go back on the road as soon as the sun comes up. I had been traveling for 9 hours when I got there, and I was exhausted. However, the cabin was far more remote than I had anticipated. It might have simply appeared that such due to the fact that it was late at night and in the forests, but it was certainly not what I had anticipated. It wasn't the row or cluster of cabins that people rented out, which is probably what I was anticipating. It sat by itself. After pulling into the gravel lot in front of the cabin, I went inside. The entrance door seemed oddly different from the rest of the cabin. Although it wasn't a problem, it was quite obvious, and I felt that the choice was strange. The rest of the cabin was old and wooden, but this door was heavy and modern. In any case, this cabin was only one room with a couch, kitchenette, bed, and TV jammed into the little room. The atmosphere was incredibly vintage. Without wasting any time, I prepared dinner, ate it, and then got ready for bed. I passed out quickly because I was quite exhausted. However, I believe that I only woke up about an hour after I had gone to sleep. Not to a sound, but to an emotion. I know it sounds strange, but for some reason, I felt incredibly nervous when I woke up. The cabin seemed quiet, so I sat up and listened for a little while to be sure I wasn't hearing anything. I looked out the window next to me, still not sure. I peered out and saw something moving in the woods right away, even though I didn't expect to see anything. Although it took me a few seconds to identify it, I was quite certain that the figure was a person based on its movements. How on earth were they out here? When I say that it was completely dark outside, I mean it. There was no light from the stars or moon shining through the deep jungle. Before they were entirely out of sight, I could only see them for 30 seconds. I waited a while by the window to see whether they would come back. 5 minutes later, though, I lay down again. Driving was going to be a long day tomorrow. I tried to close my eyes and get back asleep, but I think I laid there for 40 minutes without being able to fall asleep after hearing something outside the cabin. Before they could even process what it was, there was a knock on the door. The door they were hammering on was literally only a few steps away from me because, once more, the entire cottage was one room. And there wasn't anywhere else to go or hide. I lurched out of bed. My mind was racing. I doubt I've ever been so afraid in my life. The voice of a man shouted from beyond the door. "Hey, let's talk. Now open the door. You're in there, I know that. Go ahead and open the door." I was even more appalled by his hostile and irate tone of voice. I wasn't sure how to react or what to do. They were obviously aware that I was inside. Even my automobile virtually gave it away because it was out front. After grabbing my phone, I contacted 911. The call took 1 minute to connect. My phone was attempting to use data and was having trouble, therefore I believe it was experiencing no service. However, when it passed, I spoke with an operator online who informed me that a cop was en route. The man outside the cabin continued to bang on the door. To be honest, I couldn't tell if he was merely knocking on the door or making a concerted effort to smash it down. But he never entered. 1 minute later I heard him walk off the porch, 1 or 2. I knew it was coming from my car when I heard glass breaking. He wasn't there when the police arrived. They clearly weren't going to just go into the woods and search for him, at least not in the middle of the night, but there were some evident signs that he had fled back into them. However, things became a little strange when the cabin's owner was contacted. He acknowledged that there had been a similar event with a previous resident, but they never reported it to the police. It seems that someone was shouting at them when they knocked on the door in the middle of the night. After the guest had left the following morning, the owner discovered the door smashed open, as if someone had broken in with a sledgehammer or something. The owner probably reasoned that if he reported it, others would hear about it and no one would want to stay there. He just replaced the door with something more substantial and heavy, keeping it low. Very strange. I'm not sure how to react to that. But at the end of the day, all I wanted was to leave and visit my loved ones. I just wanted everything to be over with, but perhaps I could have done more. I'll probably be thinking about what that man came to the cabin to do for the rest of my life. Story 2, by Raymond, music, from 2018 to 2020, I was employed at a gas station. For the moment, it worked, but it wasn't the best job I've ever had. Regarding my shifts, I consistently attempted to persuade my management to assign me to the overnights. I knew I would be by myself and had less work to do. However, I worked primarily normal shifts for the first year. However, he eventually began providing me with overnights during my second year. I'll admit that while I was correct that it would be easier and more pleasant to be by myself, I failed to consider how monotonous it would get. After 1000 p.m., the business definitely slowed down. As if almost no one showed up. And if they did, it was only to go outside and obtain gas. Therefore, when I say that I didn't have to do anything, I mean it. To kill time, I found myself doing whatever I could. Out of sheer boredom, I would occasionally even venture outdoors and stroll around the parking lot. Anyway, I thought this evening was going to resemble everyone else. By 12 a.m. I needed something to occupy my thoughts. I reasoned that, at least for a little while, taking out the trash by the petrol pumps would be a decent diversion. After getting a few trash bags and emptying a few trash cans, I went to the back of the building to dispose of them in the dumpster. I almost had a heart attack when I threw them in. A man was standing directly behind it. As I approached him, I failed to notice him. "I apologize," I said uncomfortably. "I didn't see you there," mainly because I was embarrassed that I had become jump-scared and hadn't really processed it yet. The dude simply kind of stared at me with this strange, soulless glare without saying anything. I became aware of how strange it was that he was actually behind the building, next to the dumpsters, as I made my way back to the front. What on earth could he be doing back there? He didn't appear to be homeless or anything. As I emptied the other trash cans, I glanced back a couple of times before returning to dispose of them a bit more carefully, but the man was no longer there. Didn't come across them. I returned inside after throwing out the remaining rubbish. I may have acted carelessly, but I didn't find it very alarming. There were other stores on the block that stayed open late, and there was even a pub close by where customers occasionally passed the gas station on their way to and from work. I assumed it was most likely his origin, and I happened to catch him as he was taking a shortcut behind the building. Or perhaps he was simply an alcoholic. I took out my phone to see what time it was. 12:15, leaning against the counter, I tried to think of something else to do, but something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. I glanced in the direction of the entrance leading to the rear chamber. Something moved, I swear. Since I instantly assumed it was just me being tired and seeing things, I didn't get concerned right away, but since I had nothing else to do, I figured I might as well check on it. I started to approach. As I got closer, I kind of leaned my head to the right to peek around the corner of the doorway. That room's lights were out, but as soon as I entered the doorway, I noticed someone who appeared to be hiding and waiting for me to enter by standing very near to the wall. They rounded the corner as soon as I spotted them and halted. The man from behind the building was the same one, but his face had the most unsettling expression, and I can't even get the picture out of my head. It was a mixture of madness and anger. He flung the knife toward me before I could even see it in his palm. My instinct seized over, and I leaped backward, colliding with a shelf behind me before leaving the store. Then, I ran quite a distance. Dialed 911. It was somewhat hazy outside that evening, so I was unable to tell if the man had left the store or not from where I was standing on the street. But when police arrived, the man was, of course, gone. My best opinion is that, in spite of his appearance, he was a crazed homeless man who most likely wanted to kill me and steal anything he needed from the business. It's also possible that he was simply completely deranged and felt the impulse to do something terrible that evening without ever being prodded. Who can tell? After that, I stopped, and I haven't heard anything about it since. Music, Story 3, by Anna M. Like any other night, I was relaxing at home. Nothing very exciting was happening. I stayed up late to make the most of the long weekend, just lounging on the couch and watching TV. I should probably add that I lived alone in a normal suburban house. After a somewhat unpleasant breakup a few months earlier, I made the decision to keep the house instead of selling it. However, that is a tale for another time. Around 10 or 11 p.m. suddenly a sudden noise interrupted me as I was enjoying a cold can of Budweiser. It sounded like a knock, but it came from behind me, as if from the back of the house, rather than the front door, which still wouldn't have made sense at this hour. I wandered around to see what it was, leaving the TV on. I thought it might have been something tumbling over, but it sounded to me like someone tapping on a window, which couldn't be correct. I went into the hallway and glanced into the kitchen and family room, but I couldn't find anything, so I simply returned to the sofa. Since I didn't really give it much thought, I could be a little less cautious than the typical person. It must have been something insignificant, so I didn't give a damn. Before I heard it again, I remained on the couch for a bit, still drinking and relaxing. Rapping on a window. I was quite sure that was what it was after hearing it that second time. I stood up and made my way back to the other rooms. But this time, something was wrong right away. There was an open window in the rear of the room, so was the door to the basement. I possibly could have rationalized my way out of thinking someone had broken in if it had been either or. However, given that both were immediately open and the noises I had been hearing, I knew it couldn't be nothing. At the time, I felt compelled to investigate the basement, even though I now realize how foolish that choice was. I believe that my judgment was impaired by the booze. I was a large guy with a big ego, to be honest. I therefore had no intention of leaving my home and allowing someone else to escape with impunity. I peered down at the empty, dark sky. Stairway for a while. There was no sound coming from down there, for some reason. I turned on the faint lamp and walked a few paces down the groaning stairs. Music. I don't believe I had ever entered the basement that evening since I moved in. I simply never felt the need to. It was incomplete and somewhat pointless. So I was surprised to discover how little I could see when I reached the bottom. Almost nothing was done by the lights. Anyone may hide in any of the shadowy nooks and crannies. At that point, the fear really began to set in. I quickly became sober, and I left that basement immediately. I pushed the closest big piece of furniture out of the way and shut the door behind me. By some strange coincidence, an officer was immediately across the street when I contacted the police. He arrived quickly, searching the basement with his rifle drawn and a flashlight. In about 10 seconds, he discovered a man crouching in the shadowed nook near the steps. I must have been within 3 or 4 feet of him when I was down there. The dude also had a big kitchen knife. Fortunately, he went down without a battle with the policeman. I can't figure out why he broke in. It was quite pleasant outside, so the man's claim that he was merely attempting to protect himself from the weather was illogical. The man wasn't even homeless, based on what they could discover. He had a regular job and an apartment downtown. I think that was the closest I had ever come to having my life taken. And the fact that it would have happened so unexpectedly is incredibly unsettling, and for unknown cause. I suppose the lesson here is to never let your guard down too much, even on a night that seems to go by without incident. Story 3, written by Anonymous. This must have happened about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I stayed indoors and out of the weather at home a lot because it was spring and it was pouring a lot. I needed to finish some work-related paperwork. I spent this evening using my laptop while lingering at my desk in the living room. Despite having coffee around, my eyes continued to feel heavy due to my extreme fatigue. I would recline in my chair every few minutes, stretch, and massage my eyes to rejuvenate myself before returning to work. But when I leaned back once, I noticed something beside me. I almost jumped out of my seat. Directly across the room from the window was a face. The fact that the man was staring at me and didn't even bat an eyelid at my sight made it much more unsettling. He simply stood there grinning at me with his face against the window. Still in disbelief that he was there, I got up and looked back at him. They left the window before I could say anything. I didn't know how to handle being glanced at through a window because I wasn't exactly an expert at it. In all my life, I had never ever laid eyes on the man. I eventually approached and peered out, but whoever it was no longer there. Their footprints were visible in the dirt as they moved through my yard and into the trees. I took a step back and stood in the center of the room for a while to gather my thoughts. I reasoned that if I just made sure they were gone, I may be able to carry on with my night without being very anxious. After hurriedly putting on my raincoat, I opened the front door and switched on the walking outdoors and turning on the lights. I could see fairly well because it wasn't pouring too much. I approached the window beneath which he stood. Seeing my house from that angle felt a little strange. The entire room was well lit, and I could see where I was seated at my desk. Seeing it from that angle, knowing that someone was simply staring at me from here, was a little unnerving. I got chills from it. I chose to follow the footprints in the mud after glancing back down at them. A tiny amount. Now that I think about it, I realize how stupid this was. I had no idea what I was contemplating. I didn't notice anything until I had followed the prints up to the point where the trees began to get denser. They had their backs to my house. Since this was their origin, there was no indication that they were going anywhere. As I was trying to figure this whole thing out, my heart rate increased. I turned around because I was starting to feel really frightened and wanted to go back inside. However, when I turned to face the window once more, someone was inside my house, staring at me. I didn't hesitate to hurry down the street and knock on my neighbor's door. They called the cops for me, woke up, and allowed me in. When they arrived, they discovered that the back door had been forced open, probably right before I stepped outside to check on them. I'm not even sure what that ill man would have done if I had remained inside and confronted him directly.